because after you can really, the air you not take it in your nose, you bite it so good, the air, and I like to go.
Biting the air. That pretty much sums up Anzlem Boschlo's passion for the outdoors. However, he's doing weights indoors now at Unison at Kerby Center to build up his strength after a hip operation. He talks about nature as a gym and why the farm workouts are the best.
Because I have was a hip operation 1 year ago, so I give up the running. Anyway, for a little while, and after I hope I can continue to running in a forest, what I did before, very healthy way, and good natural way to take a fresh air. Glamordem, called a sandy beach. If you going on there, full with trees, especially in summer, is really beautiful. Even winter time is I enjoy it over there. Yeah, I'm very lucky to live there. I love it, that place. When I came to Canada, right away I started to live there, and still today I am there, and I don't know how long. I would like to stay another 30 years more. If the air is full with, how we call it, nutrition, from the air, people call it, you not take it a air, you bite it a air. Especially if you're going out to a forest and in a nature, a lake or a river, or even you can see animals, wild animals, that's really make it mentally balanced, more balanced, and after make it physically exercise, everything is perfectly come together.
Because my dad has just recently moved to long-term care, and there is a kind of sameness in an environment. He does not get out a lot on his own unless there's sort of people that can get him outside. So I was able to get him outside, and just the beauty. I think he was just like, holy moly, holy Toledo. That was his line.
That's why I said when I was back home, I working in a farm, and yeah, I growing up in a capital city because my father is from there, married with a village girl. That's why mama, and working in a farm. Oh my God, I love that very much. We was so happy, especially the youngsters, going over there to work, and lots of fun was in our work and in our work because we enjoy it. So wasn't pushing to deal with this thing that had to finishing that, and automatically the job is we do it. It's coming to our hand, and we not stop it. Why? Because we enjoy it. Nobody bothering us, and we were so happy.
My name's Sonya Jakubec, and I'm a professor in the School of Nursing and Midwifery at Mount Royal University.
First of all, what is the value in particular with older adults spending time outdoors?
Well, I think there's a lot of benefits that have been discovered and found actually across the board. So sort of intergenerationally and across generations with time outside. And some of it doesn't have to include kind of incredible physical activity even. So if we're talking about, older adults, sometimes you have mobility challenges or challenges getting outside. And I'll sort of use the example of my dad, who's in long-term care, has Parkinson's disease. And so for some of those kinds of challenges, actually getting yourself outside and mobilizing is difficult. But simply having contact with nature and just sort of sensing, having your senses alivened, and that sensory awakening is kind of a really huge benefit. Our senses can kind of sometimes be overstimulated, and we've found that in urban environments, and even just in scrolling and watching television, which can happen a lot, certainly as I'm thinking about, again, long-term care or just as our mobility kind of decreases sometimes. So we get overstimulated in some ways through our scrolling and video and television and such, and this kind of sensory kind of relaxation that happens. And there's been studies around this, that there's a kind of deep relaxation. It's called attentional restoration, if we use the kind of theory and so on. But our attention can restore just simply by kind of being in nature and sensing it.
And that's good for everyone, right? To step aside, even for the lunch hour, to get away from your screen, because that can relate to some sensory overload too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And so this sort of restoration that we get, and then there's a kind of reconciliation. And I like to kind of use both of those terms that happens, which is a kind of, so when we can have that contact, and that could just be sitting outside, observing, sometimes observing from a window. There are times, I'm not suggesting this is just older adults either, but people that have illness or, I think very recently there was a really beautiful image of an ICU in the UK where they built like an ICU garden, a rooftop garden. So people who, maybe have illness and are indoors in an ICU. For this woman had been indoors for 2 months, and there she was able to see this rooftop garden, and how amazing. It was quite breathtaking, right? And wouldn't you want some of your breaths to be breathtaking, even if you can't kind of mobilize and get out. So yeah, there's this sort of sensory awakening and sensory calming that can happen. Good for everybody, whatever your illness, whatever your disability, stage of cycle of life, that's there for us. And it is there for us. So there's a companioning that can happen with nature as well. This, again, some other really good studies around this sort of sense of, we're in a kind of epidemic, I think they call it, of isolation and loneliness as well. And that we certainly see that in older adults' lives, and just a part of our social and cultural kind of habits have kind of created this isolation for people. And there's a companionship. And sometimes we think about animal companions, right? I mean, our animals are nature, right? And so we're nature as well. So there's a kind of companionship that happens, that nature connects us to companionship. So there's a kind of mediating loneliness. So we can mediate this sort of sensory overload. We can mediate isolation and loneliness. And some really good research shows us how that happens in kind of very simple ways. Sometimes it doesn't have to be like climbing the peaks, although we certainly can really feel attuned with nature when we've had a challenge in nature as well. And sometimes that challenge can be small. That can be getting onto the patio. And I did a really interesting study with Alberta Parks around the place of parks and nature at end of life. So for people in palliative care and in grief and loss as well. But the sometimes very small steps that can create this connection, nature connectedness. And I'll talk a little bit about that, the studies that we have about the small steps that can happen. But, for instance, one of the people that we interviewed, who's a caregiver, talked about a resident in a hospice in palliative care who all she wanted was to see the moon. Like, she hadn't seen the moon for a year, she said. So the staff, the aides and so on at the hospice, I mean, that's a very simple solution. It doesn't, sometimes we create barriers to nature connection, but once you kind of awaken to this and the benefits, but you awaken to how simple some of these interventions can be. I don't even want to call it an intervention, just connection. It can be, taking that stretcher out to have a look at the moon, or step out onto the patio and just kind of breathe with a cup of coffee, and make those last breaths breathtaking for sure. But there's a lot of benefits. Again, it doesn't have to be hospice circumstances as well. You talked about your lunch break and that little morning coffee on the patio. And again, there's lots of physical health benefits that we get from that nature connection, I know, as well as these emotional, social that I've just talked about, the isolation, the loneliness.
Yeah, when you said the isolation and loneliness, and you said just being at one with nature, right? Like just there's a sense of companionship with nature. I was thinking, maybe you say hi to a person in the park, which is great too, because I find that increases my happiness levels. Do you find that too, just getting outside to say hi to someone?
Oh, absolutely. You're walking on a path and a trail and you're crossing. It's often, unless you're really actively speaking with somebody, walking with somebody, or rolling and strolling, or whatever it might be, you cross paths, you're going to make some connection. but you're also connecting with the place. And there is a real companionship that we have. And there's a really nice body of research out of the United Kingdom, the University of Derby, that surrounds the idea of nature connectedness. And they speak about these kind of pathways to nature connectedness as being the contact or the sensory piece. And it is kind of more than contact in their view. There is a psychological connection that comes through these pathways. So they would list them in these 5 ways of that sensory emotion, and that there is a kind of emotion that we can tune into, a joy. Sometimes it's sorrow, and that we have found that in our research around end of life and grief and loss. And there's, we can connect with our sorrow in a way sometimes society doesn't allow for us. As we connect with, and we can see the cycles of life and the seasons of life in nature.
And you mentioned the joy. I find that being outside just reminds me of my youth, being a kid, right?
Yeah.
Does that bring people back to
Absolutely. And so that's
forest?
another one of these pathways that they speak about in terms of nature connection. So there's this sensory that I've spoken about from our research, the emotion, the meaning, or sort of, and that's where memories can kind of come in. So the meaning that we ascribe to nature, right? Because we really do ascribe special meaning to our places, and there's sort of maybe that special park or the place that you go that are familiar. And in our end of life research, I really found that. I found people either wanted to go to special places that had a lot of meaning for them, or the meaning was in seeing something completely new. So for these times outside, it's like, where would you want to go? Bucket list type of things. And it was either something completely new. I want to go somewhere new, or, I've never been to Kananaskis. Or, hey, I go to Fish Creek Park. We used to go there every Sunday with the family, and that's the meaning. So there's this sensory, emotion, meaning, beauty. And there is so much beauty that we can be kind of awakened to if we tune into it. Again, it's a sort of connection and repetition is what these researchers have found. This is not my particular research, though I incorporate this into programming and other research. Sometimes we kind of get disconnected from beauty in the world, and I think, again, I'm a little bit attuned to long-term care because my dad has just recently moved to long-term care. And, there is a kind of sameness in an environment. He does not get out a lot on his own unless there's sort of people that can get him outside. And so I think for my dad, that the kind of beauty, like we went out it was Father's Day on this past weekend. So I was able to get him outside into a little courtyard, not far from his, the wing that he's in. And, just the beauty, I think he was just like, holy moly, holy Toledo. That was his line. Holy Toledo. He hadn't been out for a few weeks, and it's summer.
Yeah, humans are outdoor animals still. I mean, we've only been indoor creatures for like maybe 100 years.
Oh, for sure. And the beauty in that space and the meaning, as you talked about too, the memories. And like he used to garden. And so then there was a little, potted gardening bits and pieces, and the kind of physicality that comes from gardening and reaching and moving. And so there's a physicality as well. There's a compassion then that comes into giving back to nature. And that's part of these pathways. So they're kind of very simple pathways to make that connection.
You mentioned all the senses, and I went to like smelling because that's one of the things that will bring me back to childhood really good times. Like just smelling, when I smell willow type trees by the Bow
Yeah.
River, it takes me
Yeah.
back to fishing with my dad and making a campfire and making a little hot dog stick out of those willows. And just like, 50 years later, I'm transported
Oh,
there.
transported. And so it is those senses. And and like we shouldn't underestimate food too. Like sometimes we think about nature and it's like walking and all this, the physicality that might not be feasible for everybody all the time. And so, yeah, in times of illness, it is the sensory, the smell, it is sometimes the touch, the feel of the leaves, or the taste. Don't underestimate food and the fresh raspberry, and or even jarred foods, right? That's, we canned this, there's sort of so much that goes into all of the connection that's there for people. So it's kind of tuning into that, and the smallest steps sometimes that can get us there. So we don't need to think about this in this grand way. And I know there's a movement. I think what's lovely right now, and the fact that you've had this long-standing interest, of course, in environment and health and people and connection, but there is a kind of awakening to this need, and to the knowledge that we are nature, first of all, and the health benefits of connecting with nature. That's kind of, this is a moment right now. You've been ahead of your game in this
Ah,
way, but
well,
there is.
they say if there was a pill that was like just, being outside in nature that had the effects of it, everybody would be taking it, right?
Yeah,
And it's
vitamin
free.
N. And there is a
Yeah.
wonderful book by the author Richard Louv, who's written a book called Last Child in the Woods. He's written about this notion of nature deficit disorder, and saying that we are sort of deprived of nature, and that there's these deficits that we feel as a result of that. And he was talking about that in terms of children, of course, with this idea of last child in the woods. But he talks about vitamin N. He writes about this as well, vitamin nature. So
There's actually some physical benefits, right? Like even from the smell of like spruce and pine, the coniferous, the smell
yes,
that it releases
yes, and
actually
that's
is good for
that
you.
forest bathing. You might have
Mm,
heard about that
mhm.
term before, and that's a Japanese kind of body of research that has studied quite serious health benefits, like including kind of cancer-causing cell growth that
Mhm.
is impacted by the scent of pine and spruce. So they've, have a kind of practice of immersion in the forests for these purposes. And it's very well studied and strong research in this area. So, and interesting. It's just really interesting about how some of these then quite simple solutions are there for us.
Yeah, there's a reason why people spend so much money on aromatherapy, whether it's little things of spruce or lavender or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
and it is that same kind of, there's some ways to bring nature indoors for ourselves.
Mhm.
Other earlier studies too that really looked at the idea of biophilia, or the kind of just love of nature, and studies connected to that about the simply looking for patients that were in hospital looking out a window, that their recovery times were shorter. Patients that had a window versus those that didn't. So it's just again some of that basic contact with nature having these health benefits for us. So there's
Do,
contact, and then there's the deeper connection that we have to kind of awaken to and attune to, and sometimes make possible for ourselves or other people that have to be a bit activated. But there is some benefit, simply from being in nature, observing it, or feeling the senses.
are we able to say how much outdoor activity seniors should be getting each week?
Well, in terms of outdoor activity, there has been some study around this, and I'm a little bit less inclined to think about this in terms of time. And there is a movement right now, and I value the movement. It's in the idea of nature prescribing. And so this is when we would get into like the dose, right? The amount of time. But nature prescribing, and I mean, I have a little bit mixed feelings about that, but I absolutely see the benefit, because we have become so disengaged and disconnected that we do kind of need this nudging and kind of rewiring in a sense, or in our society. We've become so very indoorsy, that a prescription in some cases is very helpful, necessary, and important. That hearing from a professional or a kind of trusted advisor to just prescribe, and that time, again, the dosage has been studied to be 120 minutes a week. So that could be spaced out in a variety of different ways. But so there's that weekly dose, but to just experience some benefits, again, some studies around this, 10 to 15 minutes in a little spell of time outside. And again, it doesn't have to be climbing the peaks, but being immersed in nature in some way. So, and some of it can be very nearby nature, that patio view, or, you know, just even an urban sidewalk time outside. So 10 to 15 minutes in a spell can be the magic.
Yeah, that's a really good point you make, because some people might think, oh, I need to drive out to Kananaskis or Banff, but Calgary is we're so blessed to have so many wonderful green spaces
Green
here.
spaces, and just there is a sort of, you know, I think about the crack in the sidewalk with the little green grass or a little tiny jump up growing up through there, you know, and just like there's nearby nature is what that has been studied to be referred to, and there is incredible benefits from that, and there's some incredible benefits in, you know, your little tiny, you know, plot of garden that could be a little postage stamp that, you know, and there's lots of gardeners out there, and a lot of our older adults are active gardeners as well, and that there's benefits that are given back to the community as well, even like just from the diversity in that little urban garden that we might have. And I think about that you're actually giving back, because that diversity in that garden is changing our environment. It's changing the kind of insects that can cruise in here that benefit us, and it's changing the kind of air that's produced in that space. So yeah, we've got a lot of benefits just in our nearby urban nature as well. And yeah, indeed, we're very blessed with parks. We're spoiled. You know,
And our rivers too. We have our blue spaces too, which I find I can have so much wonder just listening to water.
Just feeling some coolness on a really hot day to sit by the river, and I think we're, you know, you hear some mixed things too about this urban nature, or the gardening that's cultivated, or some very cultivated parks. And right now I'm thinking in terms of older adults and caregivers, and people in care or in long-term care. For instance, at the Bethany near Forest Lawn, where we're going to see Calgary's first dementia park, Canada's first dementia park, through a number of different partners: Calgary Parks Foundation, the Dementia Network, Alzheimer's Society, and, you know, colleagues and academic colleagues, and partners just from across the city that have contributed to this park that will open in the fall.
I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be it. And it's such a great part of the city for it, because there's so many facilities for older adults there. So
Facilities,
yeah.
and the Plus 55 Center. So it's kind of also the sort of intergenerational piece, and it's a community space as well. And I think that's what's important about cultivated spaces too, is they can be for everyone. And, you know, what's good for everyone is good for everyone.